Hello and welcome in. It's your girl Alina back for another video. In this one, we will be diving into this April full moon. Is it April? Oh my gosh, April. This full moon happening in the sign of Libra, and we'll be diving into what it means for us. Here at this channel, we talk all things alignment. So aligning with the energy of the cosmos, the rhythms of the seasonal changes, and most importantly, aligning with our intuition. And I'm excited to dive into this with you. And I want to remind you that if you want an outline of this video, I have a newsletter called the Align Newsletter, where you can get it emailed straight to your inbox, and you can get all the info about each top lunation and a bunch of cool stuff. So check it out. We have this very first full moon of the astrological new year since the start of it, when we had the spring equinox near the end of March, and it's in the sign of Libra, which is ruled by Venus, which has ended its retrograde. And I'll explain why that's very notable. But before I do, I'm in my hanging chair. And I really like it. And I'm happy to hear that you guys like this new background. So welcome in. But as many of you guys know, the moon acts almost like as this receiver, in that it is the closest astral body that we have here to Earth. It's so close that it controls the tides. It raises the tides in the same way that it can also raise our emotional and intuitive energy around the time of full moons. And when we're looking at what to expect for any given full moon, we don't just look at the sign, but we also look at the ruling planet of that sign. And the moon acts almost like as this receiver, and that whatever is going on with that ruling planet can help us to better understand what we will be feeling more acutely around this time. And given that Venus has ended its retrograde, this is great news, you guys, in a lot of ways, for better or worse. It depends on how it interacts with your charts, nuance. But I'm excited to break all of this down for you. I'm excited to explore how this will uniquely look like for each of us, depending on our rising sign, when we go into the all signs forecast horoscopes. And so let's get started. All right, y'all. So on April 13th or 12th, depending on your time zone, we will be having a full moon occurring at 23 degrees in the cardinal air sign of Libra. Now, this full moon is one that is all about relationships. As we know that Libra, it's the sign of the seventh house. It's all about our connections, balance, justice in a lot of ways. And considering that this full moons in general are these culmination points, this energetic peak, where a great analogy is, somebody on a journey and they're halfway through the journey. They can very clearly, maybe at the top of a mountain, look down and see how things have played out on their way up. And that can inform them for how they want things to play out on their way down. And so full moons can be very informative in that way. A lot of things can come to the surface emotionally and in relationships, because inherently the moon rules over our emotions and deeper rooted connections. And so considering that it's in Libra, there's definitely a spotlight on our relationships on a fundamental level. Now, full moons in general, I like to call them these sort of cosmic spotlights. They can tend to highlight things that are and are not working for us, again, midway through this lunar cycle or this journey, so to speak. And so this is one of the reasons why you see many people doing full moon rituals, where they they set aside some time and they get centered, focused, and they get clear on anything that they might want to release around this time. This is why you might see people maybe writing things out that they want to let go of, and maybe they burn it in a fire, or they destroy it in some way. And it's this energetic and symbolic way of letting go of something. And just as you see that the light wanes from the surface of the moon all the way down to its energetic low point at a new moon at the end of the lunar cycle, so too can the energy and the energetic ties between the things that you want to release also wane along with it. This is why you see people working with lunar phases in a lot of ways for that reason. So this one, definitely spotlighting relationships. This can be a great one, not just romantically, but platonically, with friendships, family members, all of these things. A great time to reflect in that way for many of us. But again, we'll get more specific depending on what house this lunation is happening in your chart. And I'm excited to get into that with you. Now, another element of all full moons is that they always occur when there is an opposition aspect between the sun and moon. So as of right now, as many of us already know, we're currently in Aries season. Aries season is determined by what zodiac sign the sun is transiting through. The sun is in Aries right now, and it's in opposition. So it's on the opposite side of the zodiac wheel, so to speak, from Libra. And when we see any sort of opposition, it's usually this indicator or this signification that there can be opposition between two dualities in our lives. And when it's between Aries, the sun being in Aries, and Libra, there's this sort of theme of us likely having experiences around this time where we might notice or a calling or an invitation to strike more of a balance between the Aries themes of our life and the Libra theme. So that essentially looks like Aries being the me versus Libra being the we. The Aries being more independent versus Libra being more relationship focused and more about compromise, considerations of others, and balance, this focus of balance. Whereas Aries is more so, I need my needs. This is what I'm going to advocate for, and this is what's going on with me. Libra is also one that advocates. It's also a cardinal sign, but it's also about advocating for fairness and balance, equitability. And so these type of themes are the type of things that can pop up, especially leading up to the full moon. And I personally have noticed that it's after a full moon that a lot of that pressure seems to subside, understandably, because the light is waning. So that's something to consider. But with that said, let's go ahead and dive into the top transits happening around the time of this lunation. If you see me looking over to the side, it's because I have my notes. I like to just see like the main points and then I further elaborate. And yeah, so the first two, the first two major astrological sort of transits that I want to talk about is that Venus and Mercury ended their retrograde. Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm very happy about it. As some of you guessed in my previous video, I do in fact have a Gemini stellium. And so anything mercurial, I feel it. So I'm very excited for Mercury to end its retrograde. But both of these planets ending their retrograde, especially Venus, really gives some of the most context to the type of energy we'll likely be feeling and the type of experiences that a lot of these symbolizing, oh my gosh, that it's pointing to around this time. And I'll start with Venus. So again, Venus rules over Libra as well as Taurus, and it's this planet of love and relationships. And with any retrograde, with any planetary retrograde, when we see that a retrograde is ending, I like to describe it almost like the end of a traffic jam or the end of a bottleneck where you can finally get out on the open road. You're passing whatever the obstruction was, so to speak. And maybe you're not speeding along necessarily. Sometimes people get through and they sort of build momentum. They build in speed, getting back to the pace that they were at before. And I do want to acknowledge that we're still in Venus and Mercury's post-shadow period, which basically means that there can still be some retrograde-esque experiences still happening. It's not like a light switches on and off when a retrograde ends. But this is an indicator that around this time, a lot more things can be in play. Something that might have happened or that you noticed or observed during a retrograde, oftentimes the actions that maybe need to happen in response to those things, it feels a lot more easy to actually be in action, to actualize as the retrograde ends. So you might hear, oh, I'm moving, or, oh, maybe there's, I don't know, a breakup, or, oh, there's this move around with work, with, something's going to happen here. So it could happen in any area of life, so to speak, but especially when it comes to Venus, Venus is the planet of love and relationships. So if you are dating right now, you might notice maybe people ask you out a bit more. Maybe you feel a bit more confident to, again, take that action. There's clearer paths right now. There's clearer roads ahead. There's a bit more clarity of what's ahead coming out of this retrograde fog. And again, with this being a full moon in Libra, this is really indicating that there's a lot more clarity coming through with this full moon. There's a noticeable culmination happening right now where for many of us, we're finally connecting the dots with certain things that felt maybe foggy during the retrograde or even before. Maybe it felt foggy during the retrograde. Things kind of came to the forefront, experiences, occurrences, whatever. And you were like, okay, you're sitting with it. And it's around this time that you or maybe other people are finally articulating, processing, making decisions, those type of things can unfold. So that is something to consider. And then with Mercury ending its retrograde, can be really great for short-term travel for many of us. This can be really great when it comes to putting ourselves out there in a certain way, maybe having difficult conversations. If you were waiting, you were like, maybe not during Mercury retrograde. I'm going to avoid any potential of misunderstandings. Those type of things can come up. Maybe you feel more comfortable to finally schedule those things. Like stuff like that can occur. Maybe you're at work, you're in collaborative spaces. It can feel a bit more easier for conversation to flow. Things can actually come to the forefront of like, oh, did you hear about this? Certain changes are more likely to happen. And it's interesting because I actually was talking to some friends, and there's such a large amount of us that are all moving. Like everybody's moving. And a lot of it is happening post retrogrades, like mid-April, late April. So I find that to be very interesting. But another transit happening around the time of this full moon is that Venus in Pisces will be sextiling with Uranus and Taurus. Okay. So this can indicate a window of time where if you maybe put yourself out there, you'll likely receive that same sort of energy back. It can signal a sort of inner calling for fresh or new experiences, especially when it comes to relationships or sort of dates, where for many of us, this can manifest as a bit of restlessness. And that can manifest in more of a negative way where it's like, oh my gosh, like we never do anything. Or even with friendships, like, oh, I feel like we always have this dynamic. I kind of want to shake it up. Like I want it to be kind of different. On the other side of the coin, it can be in a more constructive way where you feel a bit more inspired to try something different or go somewhere new or approach conversations a bit differently, and you get different results. But ultimately, with Uranus, the planet of unexpected changes and shifts coming into play, there can be a bit more of an openness to changes. People can be a bit more open-minded around this time, again, with Venus. And Venus is really spotlighted around the time of this full moon. So big spotlight on relationships, potential changes, potential evolution, maybe new ideas that you have, especially at the end of a Mercury retrograde. It feels easier to articulate them, stuff like that. The other transit, the last transit that I wanted to talk about is Mercury in Pisces trining with Mars in Cancer. Mars in Cancer. This can give us a huge energy boost. It can give a lot of us notable energy boosts. It can feel a bit easier to have more quick thinking, be a bit more resourceful, having more constructive conversations where maybe we're asking about something, we're asking for help in some way. So this full moon is definitely pointing to a lot of action. It's usually around the time of the end of, it's interesting because it's usually around the time of full moons, and it's usually around the ending of retrogrades where a lot of action seems to happen. Again, think of the end of a traffic jam where everybody's kind of zipping out and they're finally able to kind of like do stuff or, get to where they need to be. But essentially it's like this analogy for being in action. More stuff can come out in the news around this time as well. There's just like a lot more action, a lot more things coming to the surface. And again, Libra is this sign of relationship. So there can be a lot more notable conversation shifts, mental clarity. But yeah, okay. With that said, let's go ahead and dive into the all signs reading. As I've mentioned a few times, I usually suggest for you to check out your rising sign if you want a reading on that. And your rising sign can change so easily depending on what time you were born. So if you haven't already looked at your charts and put in your exact birth time to get the most accurate rising sign, that's important. And I'll say that because your girl I literally thought I was a different rising sign for a very long time, for many years. And it was less than a year ago that I learned that I was a completely different sign because my mom finally found my birth certificate. Woo, living a lie. No. Anyway, all that to say, I usually suggest your rising sign because based off of your rising sign, I consider myself a more traditional astrologer. I'm actually currently studying Hellenistic astrology and I'm so excited about that. And a big aspect of that is that your rising sign can determine every single house and what sign each house is in. So if I know that you are a Taurus, then that tells me that your 12th house is in Aries. So if there's a lunation in Aries, I'm going to give you a reading based off of that house that it's activating, the 12th house. Let's say you're in Aries, you're an Aries rising. I know that your 12th house is in Pisces, and I know that your first is in Aries. You know what I mean? So it helps me determine those things to give you a more accurate reading based off of that. And depending on what house a planet is transiting, that tells me so much about how it can potentially impact you. Obviously, there's so much more nuance beyond that. But as somebody who's online, I can't look at everybody's individual charts, right? Beyond that, if you want to look at your sun or moon, I highly suggest it, because looking at your sun sign, the reading for it can more so indicate how you might experience or interact with this transit in terms of more so your career or more so your self-identity. Whereas if you're looking at your moon sign and the reading for that, it can be more of an indicator of how you might feel more so emotionally around this time. So with that said, I will see you in your sign's reading. Go down to the video description or the comment section, or you can also see the tabs in the video, and then you go to the timestamp that has your sign. And I will see you there. Ta-ta. Hello, and welcome into my Aries friends. So this full moon is activating mainly your 7th house primarily. And everything that I said at the intro of this video, talking about how poignant this is in relation to the end of Venus retrograde, this is going to be likely most notable for you, because this is happening in the 7th house of Libra. But all that to say, leading up to this full moon especially, but even 5 days following it, this is indicating that there's a higher likelihood that you have experiences that really center on your relationships and the balance that there is within your relationships. My Aries friends, especially around the time of the Venus retrograde, you might have had some experiences that spotlighted potential imbalances with relationships, or maybe even things that you did like, but maybe there were some mishaps that happened that spotlighted these smaller cracks. It's like maybe things are virtually perfect, but especially during a retrograde, that can potentially spotlight those things. And around the time of this full moon, there's a higher potential of those things kind of coming back to the forefront of your mind. Maybe you're finding a bit more clarity in how you want to articulate things, maybe to express things with people. And again, when it comes to relationships, I really want to emphasize that this is not just romantic. This can be platonic. This can be familial. This can be collaborative at work. You likely might notice some themes that are inviting you to reflect on the balance that you have in terms of boundaries, in terms of energy exchange. Who's maybe overcompensating for the lack of energy that somebody else is giving in order to have that balance, maybe vice versa. These are the type of things that can come up for you, my Aries friends, around this time. Another thing that comes to mind is a friend of mine. She's moving right now. And she's moving in with her partner for the very first time. And a lot of these things are coming up for her. And that doesn't necessarily equate to them being these huge issues. But obviously, when you're moving in with people, that sort of balance, who's doing certain chores? Like what's your relationship with doing the dishes? What's your take on volume of music at a certain hour? All of these things have to do with boundaries, have to do with balance, equitability. And a lot of that stuff is coming to the forefront for you right now, my Aries friends. So really consider asking yourself, how are you giving to others in alignment with this core intention of equitability and balance? And how are others doing that, giving that to you? And is there anything that you maybe want to release around this time? Maybe it's a mental, psychological perspective of expectations that maybe you want to release, or is it a person, is it a connection that you finally moved on from that you're ready to let go of? These are the type of things that you can consider potentially releasing if you want to release anything around the time of this lunation. But with that said, I will see you in the next one. And I want to remind you that of the spring transit guide that's custom to your rising sign, so you can get all the transits for spring, and you should check it out. It supports the channel, and I'll see you later. Peace. Hello, and welcome into my Taurus friends. So this Libra full moon will be transiting your 6th house of routines, service, structure, and nourishment, whether that's nourishing the people in your life or nourishing yourself. And so with that said, and in consideration of the end of Venus retrograde, there could be some experiences that you might have had during retrograde or over the last few days even that have maybe spotlighted for you aspects of equitability and balance when it comes to service, when it comes to giving and taking, when it comes to doing favors for people or helping people in some way. A lot of people associate the 6th house with things like motherhood, things like parenthood, And I think that a big reason why that is because it is very emblematic of the giver, of I have these experiences and this knowledge and this routine. How can I give? How can I be of service? And so those are the type of dynamics that might come to the forefront right now. You might have some experiences in this space. And so it can be really good to reflect on what your routines look like, what your relationships look like when it comes to routines. You know, what comes to mind is boundaries when it comes to work-life balance. For example, I work from home. And so sometimes I'll call friends in the middle of the day. Sometimes they call me because I already set that tone. And there are some times where I'll be on the phone with people and I'll realize, okay, I really need to, end the call now because I need to get back to work. Like that's just a small example of the type of experiences that might arise. This also, again, can be work related. It could have to do with coworkers as well. But there's this sort of cosmic spotlight bringing something to the surface potentially for you or people around you when it comes to this sort of relational balance with the work that is put in, with the service that is put in, with the skill sets that are given and received in some way. And so really reflect on how far you've come with taking care of yourself and others, but also consider what you maybe might need to release in order to have more balance with what you give and with what you receive. Another way that this can manifest is a realization of, oh, I haven't been reaching out as much in relationships as maybe I would like to, and they've been putting in more of that work, so to speak, or they've been the one of service to me more so than I realized, and how can I make this more balanced? These are the type of things that can potentially pop up for you, my Taurus friends. But with that said, I am wishing you a beautiful lunation, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Hello, and welcome into my Gemini friends. So this Libra full moon will be activating your 5th house of creativity, your inner child, your pleasure, and romance. And, romance is this sort of element of creativity in some ways, of how can we communicate how we're feeling and create this environment of love in a lot of ways. But even beyond romance, I think that this full moon is really signifying potential experiences, especially leading up to the full moon, where you might reflect on striking a balance between your authentic creative self and who you are as an individual, and balancing that with assimilating with the people or community around you, going along to get along. And what first comes to mind there is sometimes a relationship with parent and child. Sometimes parents see their child in a certain way, and sometimes you grow out of that image and you want to be able to show up exactly how you are. That's just one of many potential examples, but it's one example of this dichotomy between co-creating a space that's respectful and balanced and being considerate of the other person, but also who are you when nobody's looking? Who are you? When was the last time that you were truly fully yourself, or maybe expressing yourself creatively or doing something creative, and there was no judgment there? You were just existing in the moment. Like you were so present. There was no extra consideration of others or overly self-conscious potentially. Those are the type of things that might come up around this time. The 5th house can also reflect family life as well. So again, this might involve familial type of things, but especially because it's in Libra following the Venus retrograde, there can be things that come up that are tied to potential mishaps, hiccups, or things like that happen during Venus retrograde, that maybe they're finally coming to the surface in some way, where people are articulating things to you, or you're finally finding the words for things, or things come to a head in some way. But ultimately, this is really highlighting the important role that your hobbies, in my opinion, I feel like your hobbies and your interests play, and whether or not it's equitable when it comes to allowing yourself to pursue those things. Like, the 5th house is very much about, again, like interests, play, hobbies. Yeah, think about things like that. And so around this time, it can be really helpful to maybe even get back to that stuff. Like just reflect on what is your relationship with those things. Another example of this is when I was in high school, I loved theater, and I was so excited to get back into acting in theater. And that is a relationship that I had with that pure level of expression that I found joy in. And so, yeah, that's an example of it as well. But with that said, I'm wishing you a beautiful full moon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you at the end of the video as well. And yeah, peace. Hello, hello, and welcome in to my Cancer rising friends. So this full moon will be activating your fourth house of your inner circle, your family, your home, your shelter. Think of nesting, think of sanctuary. Where do you go? Think, the fourth house is a house of, the sign of Cancer actually, which is interesting. And so it's really emblematic of this cocoon, this shell that protects what we care about most, right? And so around the time of this full moon, it's really signaling that you might get some news from family members, particularly siblings, it could be. And it's also signaling important conversations that could come up around this time when it comes to your inner circle. And again, going back to this being a Libra full moon, these experiences will likely be tied to our relationships, the balance, the equitability that happens within these spaces. And it definitely seems like it will be spotlighting certain memories and core values for you in some way, where something happens where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Man, I really enjoyed when we did that. And there's this sort of coming to the surface in a way of this care and love that we have, or this connection that you have with your inner circle in some way. And so, yeah, I think it'll be a very interesting lunation in that regard. Another thing to consider around this time is that with full moons, they can kind of bring up deeper rooted emotions in a lot of ways. And so some important conversations could be happening around this time as well when it comes to family stuff. What comes to mind is setting boundaries in some way, but it could also be just heart to hearts. Seems like that could also play a role around this time. But ultimately, it can be very helpful to reflect on the role that you play in your inner circle dynamics, and also the role you play in fostering that care, love, and protection, and sort of insulating those things. And what does it look like to foster those things within your relationships? Sometimes there's like the matriarch or the patriarch of certain families and stuff where they're always the one organizing things, checking in on people, but who checks in on them? So this can be a really notable time also I invite you to call some family members. That one aunt or that one uncle or that one cousin that you love, you just haven't talked to in a while. You never know. A lot of those type of conversations, especially following a Venus retrograde, could bring notable insights of like, oh, okay, I didn't know that before. I'm glad we talked about it. So consider that. But with that said, I will see you in the next one, and I'm sending you my love. I'll see you at the end of the video. And peace. Hello, hello, and welcome into my Libra friends. Not Libra, girl. Leo friends. Leos. Welcome into my Leo friends. This full moon will be primarily spotlighting your third house of communication, short-term travel, socializing, internet exchange, knowledge acquisition, things like that. And the internet as well. I know too much about the third house because it's ruled by Gemini. I have a lot of Gemini in my charts. But anyway, so this Leo full moon is really indicating a potential culmination point when it comes to information coming out. Like conversations are swirling a little bit around this time where there's new info coming out, like new insights being shared, articles coming out relevant to you in a way that you're like, oh, okay, I didn't know that before, but now I do. And especially considering that Venus ended its retrograde, we're in its post-shadow period, there could be things like potential hiccups, setbacks, miscommunications, little things that happen maybe throughout the Venus retrograde where you're finally connecting the dots and potentially being able to fully articulate it in some way and finally have the words to process it in a different way than you did before. And so that is something that can definitely come up. Another way that this can manifest leading up to the full moon is people coming to you. It's giving, maybe not gossip. There's two sides of the coin of gossip, right? Like on one side of the coin, it can be detrimental in a lot of ways. On the other side of the coin, I feel like there's some form of communication that's been labeled as gossip that actually is rooted in a bit of sexism, in that sometimes people are talking about other people because they're sharing information and because they're saying like, hey, here's a heads up about X, Y, and Z. I just want you to know. And I think gossip can be more detrimental when it's like kept away from the subject, the person or something like that. But there's a potential for new information to come out about in some way. So that is something to keep an eye on for you, my Leo friends. But on the other side of the coin, I think that this can be a time when you're finally learning something, that you're finally doing some research, or you're finally getting some insight from others that you have been looking for a while. You're finally getting some info. And so that's another thing to look out for leading up to this full moon. And And the last thing I will say, again, tied back to this being a Libra full moon, and Venus retrograde having ended leading up to this, is that for you, you might feel a potential buildup to finally let somebody know how you feel, or finally write out how you feel, finally let yourself know how you feel, and that you finally acknowledge it for yourself. You're finally journaling about it. You're finally articulating it, where you're like, oh my gosh, this is actually not okay. Or actually, oh my gosh, I think I love him. Like these type of things can come up, but ultimately with it being in the third house, the third house also involves siblings and friends. So this can also have to do with your friendships. This could have to do with siblings, people, maybe friends or siblings coming to you and expressing something as well. Some new news coming about for sure. But yeah, with that said, I am sending you my love. I hope that you enjoyed this reading. I'll see you at the end of the video. And yeah, sending you my love. Peace. Hello to my Virgo friends. So this full moon in Libra will be transiting and activating your second house of finances, of values, resources, income, priorities, self-worth. These are the type of things that will be spotlighted around the time of this lunation. And with it being in Libra, there's a lot of stuff having to do, I think, big spotlight on self-worth, on self-love, I think is a big spotlight. And then secondary will be finances. And considering that Venus has ended its retrograde, we're in the post-shadow period. Around this time, you might notice potential patterns or news when it comes to finances. It might be, this potential mishap that happened with a credit card. You tried to use it during Venus retrograde. There was an issue there, or Mercury retrograde as well. There was an issue there. And now it's coming to the forefront of your awareness of like, oh, actually this bank, there's an issue with the account. Let me organize that. That can be, a smaller way it can show up. Another way it can show up is potentially you're realizing there's this spotlight where you kind of see things for what they are when it comes to maybe how you've conducted yourself with others, how it has been tied back to your self-worth, your self-love. And there's this clarity there for you. And so around the time of this full moon, it can be really potent to reflect on your financial wellness, your relationship with finances, as well as your relationship with your self-value, your self-worth. What comes to mind is, many people, this is like such a common thing of avoiding looking at the bank account, avoiding looking at the credit of your credit, avoiding looking at these things because it's like, oh, I don't want bad news. Finances is like such a serious subject. It's stressful. Totally understandable, right? And around the time of this full moon, it can be really good to finally shed some light on those things and kind of lean into and align with the energy of this full moon in bringing a bit of clarity there. This being a Libra lunation, it's all about balance. It's all about equitability. So this can also show up in relationships as well. Like a lot of people like to talk about finances when it comes to the second house, but a lot of the second house themes also have to do with balance, duality. It's the number 2, and so this can also show up in balance in relationships as well. And so, yeah, I think that those are the themes that are going to come up, but definitely reflecting on your financial wellness and also your self-image, your self-worth, and how you conduct yourself in relationships. And if there's any part that your self-worth has played in relationships that maybe you weren't aware of before, because that can be incredibly illuminating around the time of this lunation. But with that said, I will see you in the next one. I'll see you at the end of the video, actually. And I'm sending you my love. I think that's it. Okay, bye. Hello, and welcome in to the star of the show, so to speak, my Libra friends. This is a full moon in your sign of Libra. So that means that this is, if you're watching this for your rising sign, that means that this lunation is happening in your first house of the self, the ego, self-image, appearance, your personal health. Think of the body, that's the very first immediate aspect of self. And so this full moon is indicating, especially leading up to it, and especially following the end of Venus retrograde, Venus being the ruling sign of Libra, there could be a potential spotlight on what's really coming to mind is health in some way, where it's like, how you're with your younger family members or something, or you're out and you're like, oh, let me go do that one thing. Let me run or skip or do something the way I used to. And then I pulled something and you're like, oh, okay, this is a reminder. I need to stretch more, work out more. Maybe a digestive thing sort of comes up around this time, though that can be a bit more second house, but the spotlight potentially on your health for some of us. And then for some other people, for some of my Libras, the overarching theme with it being in your first house is this spotlight on who you are as an individual and on your self-image. And with it being in Libra, it seems like there can be these overarching themes of you striking a balance between your own self-image and how you view yourself and how you view your life and how, you know, what your potential is and what you're capable of, and distinguishing that from maybe other people that you've had relationship with. And what comes to mind is the concept of limiting beliefs of, you know, let's say growing up, you mentioned to your parents, I want to be an actor. I want to do this one thing. And your parents or people around you were like, oh yeah, but what about these issues? What about how hard it's going to be? You know, ultimately rooted in care for you. They want you to have a career that's balanced and that works out for you. But that can be an example of limiting beliefs being placed on you, and then that sort of ripple effect mentally within you. And this full moon, I feel like being in your first house can really spotlight this, can be a very optimal time for you to pause, to reflect on and distinguish, where have certain aspects of my self-image stemmed from? Did it have more to do with certain relationships that I have experienced? Again, bringing in these Libra themes, or has it had more to do with X, Y, and Z? And which are mine, which are not, which are constructive for me, which are not, and diving into that a bit more. There can be so much illumination when it comes to that for you, my Libra friends, around the time of this lunation. And again, following Venus retrograde, there can be a potential buildup in a sort of conclusion or a culmination that's tied to potential experiences that you had during the retrograde. Now that it's ending, there's like easier flowing pathways and streams, so to speak, when it comes to the ideas and actions and experiences that pertain to Venus ruled aspects of our life, that being our relationships. But again, with Libra being in the first house, the full moon transiting your first house, it pertaining to you as an individual. And again, your health. It could be very helpful for you to reflect on that at this time. But with that said, I will see you in the next one, and I'm sending you my love. Peace. Oh, I'll see you at the end of the video. Bye. Hello, hello, and welcome into my Scorpio friends. So this lunation will be happening in your 12th house of seclusion, self-undoing, potentially hidden enemies, reflection, and really drawing your energy back to yourself in a lot of ways, to really sit back and look and reflect on your life and on your relationships, especially with this being a Libra lunation. And so leading up to this lunation, especially if it's, you know, it's in the house of hidden enemies, it's very interesting. I think that there could be potential for you guys where you're finally realizing there's a culmination of like who is in your, not team, but who's in your corner and maybe who is not. That can show up for you. Another thing that can show up is your own hidden shadows, your own hidden sort of karmic relationship with yourself or with others in some way. But the 12th house has a lot to do also with spirituality, with things beyond this immediate dimension, so to speak, dreams, imagination. That can also manifest as idealizing things as well, escapism in some ways. And so with the full moon spotlighting this house, it could spotlight for some of you where you're maybe being a little bit too idealistic or maybe a little bit too pessimistic. Either end of the spectrum, you're allowing your imagination to kind of take you a little bit farther away from reality in some way. You know, full moons are really great for revealing things, spotlighting things. And so this can be a very potent time for you, so to speak, in that realm as well. But again, with this being a Libra full moon, it all goes back to relationships. It all goes back to balance, duality. How do you strike a balance with certain things? Especially when it comes to processing. I feel like it does seem like there might be something that you're finally ready to process around the time of this full moon as well. But ultimately, a really great thing that you can do around this time is journal. If you're in talk therapy, that type of thing, you know, finding words or ways to kind of express or even transmute energy. That can be creative expression. You know, the 12th house also has to do with creativity in a lot of ways. So, by the way, I just realized I might have referenced Pisces when really I wanted to reference the 12th house, but the 12th house is tied to Pisces. So a lot of those themes, and you know, they interplay with one another. But yeah, I hope that you have a beautiful lunation, and that if there are some potential revelations that come out in some way, that it's only for the best for you, especially when it comes to relationships. And yeah, but I will see you at the end of the video, and I'm sending you my love, and yeah, peace. Hello, hello to my Sagittarius friends. Welcome on in. This full moon will be illuminating and really activating your 11th house of friendships, collaboration, innovation. Think of also audience and networking. And with that, in consideration, with this being a Libra full moon, it seems like there's going to be a culmination point or spotlight. It's really signifying potential experiences that involve your collaborative spaces, whether that's work, whether that's maybe even being in the spotlight in some way. But it's ultimately tied to the innovative ideas that can kind of come through with collaborations. And there could be this culmination in that you might have an experience where people around you open up to you about something, where new information arises, or where there's a potential shift in some way in your collaborative spaces where, oh, actually, we're going to do this a bit differently now. Or actually, I've been meaning to mention to you, like, this is my perspective on this and that. And especially with this being a Libra lunation and because of that, it being tied to Venus, which just ended its retrograde, you might experience a lot more clarity and the ability to finally articulate dots that you've been connecting when it comes to something that you're working on, when it comes to trying something from a slightly different perspective. And so with that said, leading up to this lunation especially, but even 5 days following it, it can be very helpful for you right now to pause to ask yourself, is there anything in my life, especially in collaborative spaces, whether that's with family, relationships, work, or on your own, that you've been kind of trying it over and over again in a certain way, you haven't seen any changes, that maybe if you tried it differently, or maybe if you got a brand new, fresh perspective, that maybe things would change. What comes to mind is that saying, you get different outcomes when you have different actions. It's worded a little bit more eloquently than the way I worded it. But that type of theme feels like that's an overarching theme for you leading up to this full moon, because again, full moons are these cosmic spotlights on what is and isn't working for you. On the other side of the coin, it could be spotlighting around this time the things that are working, the things that you do love. That can signal that this can be an optimal time for celebrating how far you've come. But with that said, I am sending you my love. I'm wishing you a beautiful full moon, and I'm sending you a virtual hug, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Hello, hello, and welcome into my Capricorn friends. So interestingly, this lunation in Libra will be transiting your 10th house of your outer circle, your reputation, your career, your exposure. So how the world, or how the sort of your outer circle sort of sees you, what in terms of your reputation in some ways. And with this being in Libra, it's all about relations, baby. It's all about public relations. It's all about, even potentially networking, but it goes back down to how do you connect with people, maybe even on a professional level? Where is there potential, with this full moon being this sort of cosmic spotlight of what is and isn't working midway through the lunation? Are there any aspects of your relationships that you consider to be really balanced, very equitable, that you'd like to celebrate around this time? Or alternatively, that maybe there is an imbalance around this time. Leading up to this full moon, these are the type of themes that will likely be spotlighted. You might have experiences pertaining to these things where you have most importantly, more clarity. You have more clarity around these things. And in consideration of Venus ending its retrograde, Venus being the ruling planet of Libra, you might notice, again, this overarching theme of clarity, this overarching theme of things being in action, things playing out, hearing about certain moves being made, maybe even at a quicker pace than it was, especially since the start of this year. And so that's something to consider too, but ultimately it'll be very helpful for you around this time, my Capricorn friends, to pause and ask not just what's the state of, your career path, your ambitions, what you see in that space, but what has been working. What could you celebrate around this time? And then also reflect on energy exchange when it comes to relationships. Where is there balance, or maybe is imbalance in those spaces? Reflecting on anything that you can potentially tweak so that your path stays clear and it continues to be clear. It's not just about gaining the clarity, but it's also about acting upon it and seeing how you can implement it. And under this Libra full moon, it can feel a bit easier to make those connections and have some pretty notable conversations around this time. But with that said, I'm sending you my love. I hope that you have a beautiful, beautiful full moon that is more so spotlighting what is working than what isn't. That's always the idea or the ideal. But either way, I hope that you have a beautiful time. And yeah, I'll see you at the end of the video. Peace. Hello, hello, and welcome into my Aquarius friends. So this Libra full moon will be transiting and activating your 9th house of long distance travel, philosophy, spirituality, even think of like potentially divination, world news, worldviews, your perspective on things, your morals, and the media even. And I say that because the 11th house is all about expansion, right? So all things expansion. When you travel, you're expanding your world, you're expanding your perspective. When it comes to spirituality, philosophy, that's the exploration of this more expanded bird's eye view of reality. And all of that to say, with this full moon being this cosmic spotlight, bringing something to the surface, potentially signifying a culmination point in an aspect of your life for you guys, it seems to be indicating this culmination or this growing clarity, or finally you see the path forward where you're finally taking action on something that pertains to maybe higher education, that pertains to your spiritual practices, diving deeper in some way, that pertains to travel. Maybe you're finally going to book something, or that pertains to even teachers, the teachers that we have in our life, not just ones from school, but think of our elders, think of our friends, and learning and broadening our perspectives in some way. So these are the things that can come up, but ultimately under a Libra full moon, and considering that it's in Libra, again, it goes back to our relationships and our balance, our equitability. And I think that if you are someone who is maybe having relationship issues or mishaps, maybe not issues, but things are kind of brought up over and over again, so to speak, it could be helpful for you to try to see things from a bird's eye view. And a good sort of prompt for that is consider what your 90-year-old self would think of your current situation. Consider what your childhood self would think of this potential situation. What sort of advice might they want to extend to you? How could that perspective inform you in approaching things from a different way or seeing things from a broader perspective? Those are the type of things that can be very, very potent around this time. But with that said, I hope that you have a beautiful full moon, and thank you for watching. What else? And I'll see you at the end. Peace. Hello to my Pisces friends. So interesting. I feel like this full moon is indicating some potential shadows within you and others, potential secrets coming to the forefront, coming to the front of the class, speaking our truth in some way, and potential realizations of shadow aspects of ourselves or others that are at play that maybe we didn't realize were playing a role in certain situations. Like what comes to mind is maybe if it pertains to work, it's like, oh, this person has been passive aggressive to me because they are deeply insecure. That's something they're never going to say, right? That's a hidden aspect of themselves. And the reason why I say this is because this Libra full moon is transiting your 8th house of the taboo, of karma, of the shadow self, of intimacy, of the necessary vulnerability that comes with intimacy, of shared resources, of being dependent on one another, which can bring in a whole other layer to a relationship. And so with that said, around the time of this full moon, this Libra lunation, it seems like it's going to be this culmination, this buildup, or this spotlight specifically on those things. And this can be a completely independent experience that has nothing to do with anybody else, where you're realizing, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize this insecurity that was playing a role with me behaving a certain way, or I didn't realize that I have this fear from this past relationship or this past experience that has informed my decisions up until now. Or, like these are the type of aha moments and insights that can come about. You could be realizing it about yourself or others. People could be opening up to you. Again, the 8th house is the house of intimacy. Another perspective of this lunation for you guys is that when it comes to shared resources, something notable could be happening around this time that involves maybe you going in on a deal with someone, or a business transaction, or a legal transaction, or a financial something, so to speak. Either way, it's involving you being tied to others in some way. This is the house of other people's money. So not necessarily yours. This is a house of long-term investments, of really putting in an investment time-wise, money-wise into something, energy-wise, emotion-wise, putting in to something long-term to potentially get something out of it. Or think of like long-term relationships, my Pisces friends. So there's a lot of spotlight in these areas, and it can definitely come up. Again, Libra full moon. So relationships, equitability, balance. This is post-Venus retrograde. So any sort of mishaps, congestion, hiccups, slowdowns, anything that might have arisen around the time of the Venus retrograde in its post-shadow period at the end, since Venus has already ended its retrograde, these experiences could potentially be tied to anything that happened around that time, where there's this kind of like this buildup of a culmination of finally doing this thing, finally saying this thing, finally experiencing this thing, where maybe it's been a long time coming. Again, like think of long-term investments or the start of something new, but ultimately there's a spotlight here. And I personally think that around this time, it can be so potent for you, my Pisces friends, to reflect on anything that you might need to let go when it comes to hidden taboo things, and namely shame. Because what's the overarching reason why things are hidden? What's the overarching reason why, for example, jealousy is, a more sort of taboo thing people never want to admit to, or a fear of something, or an aversion to something that's tied to something else, or maybe even something that you really enjoy and you like, but it's taboo to enjoy and like those things. Like, why are things hidden, right? It's usually to go along, to get along, to assimilate, and sometimes shame. And so around this time, it can be really potent to sit down and ask yourself, is there anything that I really want, but I've been afraid to say out loud? Is there anything that is like, are there any patterns in my life? And underneath that, is there any overarching theme of some way that I view life or myself or relationships that has played a role in me navigating the world in that same way for so long? Things like that can come to the surface. That can be a very potent sort of space to be in, to kind of explore for yourself, to explore maybe anything you might be ready to let go of at the time of this full moon. And again, this might show up with other people bringing these things up to you, and you helping them with that, deepening your relationships in intimacy through this vulnerability, through demonstrating that you're a safe person for them to open up about these things with. So that can also manifest. With that said, I am sending you my love. I hope that you have a very fruitful, constructive, and illuminating full moon in Libra. And thank you for watching this channel. And yeah, I'll see you in a sec. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and get into these journal prompts. I have written them out in the video description and the comment section. I would love if you commented under them anything that comes up for you based off of those journal prompts. I feel like I gave each of you guys, a more poignant sort of prompt to explore based off of your sign, but these are very much Libra themed journal prompts to explore. So check those out. But yeah, that basically wraps up the video. Before I go, I wanted to mention that I had a few comments in my last video asking when I would be hosting another retreat. So as some of you know, I hosted my very first retreat in Thailand last June, almost a year ago, which is crazy. And it was a group of people, and we were off of the coast of Thailand. We were actually on the island of Koh Samui and another island I'm forgetting the name of. But fun fact, if you're watching The White Lotus, they filmed it on the island of Koh Samui where we had the retreat. And it was a beautiful time. We not only got to have, go snorkeling and go on these adventures and immerse ourselves in the culture and the climate and the beauty of Thailand, but we also got to connect on an astrological level and explore our charts and learn. And I was able to offer some insight in astrology and stuff like that. And if you're interested in that, I'm going to let y'all know. I wanted to do one this year, but I paused mainly because of the economy. And I was just thinking about pricing, and I was maybe overthinking things a bit. And ultimately, the only thing in the way of me scheduling another retreat is just insight. I just want to know, where do you guys want to go? What is your budget? What's the length of a retreat that you're most comfortable with? I've seen some people talk about doing it for a weekend versus a week, where it's like, okay, if it's in the States, I'm comfortable with a weekend, but if it's out of the country, I want to do it at least a week because I traveled so far. Or, you know, I just want to know. And I actually have a survey linked in the video description that it would be so helpful for you to fill out if you're interested in a retreat and going on an adventure with me. Girl, y'all, I love to travel. Let me tell you what, okay? I'm an adventurous person. I love being in community with like-minded people who are also adventurous. We can talk about what drew us to go on this trip. Where have you traveled before? But also we can dive into astrology. I also want to know, if I did some workshops, what type of workshops would you want? I have a survey. It would be super helpful for you to let me know what you think. But with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. I'm wishing you a beautiful lunation. And yeah, oh my gosh, y'all. I just love this new setup, I must say. And I'm glad that you guys do too. I read your comments from the last video. But if you made it to the end, I would love if you commented 3 heart emojis for this Libra full moon. But with that said, I'll leave you with my favorite quote, which is, be gentle with yourself, because life is about the journey, not the destination. All right, I will see you in the next one. Bye. Peace.